There are things still sitting in the water off the coast of Normandy. Enormous concrete structures, rusting quietly, about a mile offshore from a small French village called Armaments. Most tourists who visit photograph them without knowing what they are. They're what kept D-Day alive. Not the landing. The landing is the famous part. 156,000 Allied troops hitting 5 beaches on June 6, 1944, against everything the Germans had built to stop them. That part most people know. What most people don't know is what happened the morning after, and the morning after that. Because here's the thing. You can land an army on a beach, but you can't keep it there without ports. Without fuel, ammunition, food, reinforcements, millions of tons of it arriving continuously. And the Allies had no port. Every major harbor on the Normandy coast was German-held and heavily fortified. The last time the Allies tried to take one by force, they lost 3,500 men before lunch. So they built their own. They towed it across the channel in pieces, in secret, and then they assembled it offshore while the battle for the beaches was still being decided. The Imperial War Museum calls the Mulberry Harbours one of the greatest unsung inventions of the Second World War. I'd go further. Without them, D-Day might not have held. To understand why the Allies needed a portable harbor, you need to understand what happened at Dieppe. August 1942, 2 years before D-Day. The Allies mounted a raid on the German-held port of Dieppe. 6,000 men, mostly Canadian, tasked with seizing the harbor, gathering intelligence, and withdrawing. The goal was to prove that taking a defended port was possible. It was a catastrophe. The preliminary bombardment failed to soften the German defenses. The tanks got stuck on the shingle beach. Of the men who went ashore, more than 3,500 were killed, wounded, or captured. The operation lasted less than a day. The lesson was brutal and unambiguous. Attacking a defended port head-on was close to suicidal. If D-Day was going to work, not just the landing, but the weeks after it, the Allies needed another way to get supplies ashore at scale. That problem landed on Churchill's desk in 1942. His response was a memo, titled, with a directness I find genuinely refreshing in a wartime document, Piers for Use on Beaches. Churchill had been thinking about artificial harbors since the First World War. Now, with the invasion of Europe being planned, the idea became urgent. His instructions were brief and precise. The piers must float up and down with the tide. The anchor problem must be mastered. Let me have the best solution worked out. He left the rest to the engineers. If this is the kind of story you want more of, subscribe. It's free, takes 2 seconds, and it genuinely keeps this channel running. Now, what those engineers actually built. What they built has a name that sounds almost too mundane for what it was. Mulberry. 2 of them. Mulberry A for the American sector at Omaha Beach. Mulberry B for the British and Canadian sector at Gold Beach near Armaments. Each one a prefabricated artificial harbor, built across Britain by thousands of workers and hundreds of contractors in total secrecy, then towed across the English Channel in sections and assembled offshore. The engineering is worth understanding because it's genuinely extraordinary. Each harbor had 3 main components. The outer breakwater was formed by enormous hollow concrete structures called phoenixes, some the height of a 5-story building, weighing up to 6,000 tons each. They were floated into position and sunk to form a barrier against the sea. Inside the breakwater, floating roadways called whales stretched from deep water toward the shore. Miles of flexible steel pontoon road that rose and fell with the tide, capable of carrying tanks. At the shore end, pier heads called spuds were jacked up and down on legs resting on the seabed. The sections were towed slowly across the channel in convoy. The largest components moved by tugboat in the dark, across one of the most heavily patrolled stretches of water in the war. The dress rehearsal was also the premiere. There was no practice run, no chance to get it wrong and try again. By mid-June, both harbors were operating.
Then the storm arrived.
June 19th, 1944, 13 days after D-Day. A severe channel storm hit the Normandy coast and didn't let up for 3 days. Mulberry A at Omaha Beach took devastating damage. By June 22nd, it was beyond repair and was abandoned. The Americans returned to running landing ships directly onto the beach. Slower, weather-dependent, far less efficient. Mulberry B at Arromanches survived. It was damaged, sections needed repair, some components were lost. Engineers salvaged usable pieces from the wreckage of the American Harbour and used them to restore the British one. And then Mulberry B kept going. For 10 months. In those 10 months, Mulberry B landed 2.5 million troops, 500,000 vehicles, and 4 million tons of supplies. It supplied the Allied armies through the breakout from Normandy, through the liberation of France, through the push toward Germany. It kept operating until major continental ports and supply lines reduced the need for it. The concrete phoenixes are still there. You can see them from the beach at Arromance today, sitting in the water a mile offshore. Most people photograph them without knowing what they are. After the war, Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister, the man responsible for the Atlantic Wall, reflected on the invasion. His words, widely attributed in post-war accounts. To construct our defenses, we used vast quantities of concrete and steel. A fortnight after the landings, this effort was brought to naught by an idea of simple genius. Simple genius. From the man who built the wall, the Allies went around. The Mulberry Harbours don't appear in most popular histories of D-Day. The beaches are remembered. The soldiers are remembered, rightly. The weather decision, the generals, the speeches, all remembered. But the floating harbors that kept the invasion supplied, that turned a fragile beachhead into an unstoppable advance, that survived a devastating storm and ran for 10 months, those are a footnote. The invasion you know was built on infrastructure you don't. That's what this channel is about, not the famous part, the part underneath it, the system, the invention, the quiet engineering that made the famous part possible. If you want to keep finding these stories, subscribe and leave a comment below. Tell me what you think should get an episode. See you next time.